She was born without a voice. Someone whispered from the front row, not softly enough, not kindly enough, and the words drifted through the grand ballroom like a verdict already decided as crystal chandeliers glowed above polished marble floors, and the quiet hum of wealth filled the air with a kind of practiced indifference that only the powerful could afford. Poor thing. Another voice followed, almost sympathetic, but not quite, because sympathy without understanding often sounds like distance dressed up as care, and at the center of it all stood Claire Whitmore, 8 years old, dressed in white, her small hands trembling slightly at her sides as 100 eyes watched her not as a child, but as a question no one had been able to answer. Victor Whitmore sat in the front, his tailored suit sharp, his posture straighter than it needed to be. A man who had built an empire from nothing, and yet could not build a single word from his daughter's silence. "Go on, sweetheart," he said, gently, his voice steady but thin at the edges, as if hope itself had been worn down over time. Claire didn't move. The pianist behind her pressed a single soft key. A cue. A beginning. A chance. The room leaned forward. 3 seconds passed, then 5, then 10, and still nothing. "Maybe we should." Marissa Kane stepped forward with a polished smile, already preparing to redirect the moment, to save the image, to protect the narrative, because in rooms like this, failure was never allowed to breathe too long. But then, near the service entrance, just beyond the velvet ropes and quiet conversations, a man in a faded work jacket paused beside a gray rolling bin, his gloved hand resting lightly on the handle as if he had been about to move on, and simply chose not to. His name was Daniel Brooks, and to everyone in that room, he was invisible. A garbage man, mid-30s, worn boots, quiet eyes, the kind of man people passed without seeing, the kind of life that didn't belong under chandeliers or among million-dollar donations. "Sir, you can't be back here," a security guard murmured under his breath, not unkind, just firm, because rules were easier than understanding. Daniel didn't argue, he didn't raise his voice, he simply looked past the guard, past the noise, and straight toward the stage where a little girl stood frozen in a silence that felt heavier than the room itself. "Just give me 30 seconds, he said quietly, his voice calm, grounded, carrying not force but certainty. The guard hesitated, just for a moment, because there was something in the way Daniel said it, something that didn't ask for permission and didn't need to prove itself, and in that small pause, something shifted. Daniel stepped forward slowly, not toward the spotlight, not toward the audience, but toward Claire, lowering himself to one knee a few feet away from her, as if meeting her where she truly was, not where the world expected her to be. "Hey," he said softly, not like a stranger, not like a doctor, not like someone trying to fix her, just like someone who saw her. Claire's eyes flickered. Just for a second the room held its breath somewhere. A glass stopped mid-air somewhere. A whisper died before it finished, and in the quiet that followed, Daniel lifted his hand and tapped twice against his chest, slow, steady, like a heartbeat remembered, not heard. Then he waited, not to impress, not to perform, just to listen, and for the first time that night, Claire didn't look at the crowd, she looked at him. The room did not breathe. It listened. And in that listening something fragile began to unfold as Daniel's fingers tapped again. 2 soft beats against his chest, steady as a heartbeat you only notice when everything else goes quiet. "It is okay," he whispered, not to the room, not to the father watching from the front row, but to the girl whose world had never trusted sound. Claire's shoulders shifted, barely, almost imperceptible, like a leaf testing the wind for the first time, and Daniel did not rush it, did not fill the silence, because he understood something most people in that room did not. That silence was not emptiness, it was a place, and you had to enter it with respect. He tapped again, slower this time, and then he waited. The pianist behind them lowered his hands, uncertain, the notes dissolving into nothing, as if even the music knew it no longer belonged here. Victor Whitmore leaned forward in his seat, confusion crossing his face, then something sharper, something closer to hope, but too cautious to be named. "What is he doing?" Marissa whispered under her breath, her polished composure cracking just enough to reveal discomfort, because this was not controlled, this was not planned, and things that could not be controlled made people like her uneasy. Daniel did not answer. He did not look up, he simply softened his posture, lowering himself further, bringing his presence down to Claire's level, not above her, never above her. "You do not have to say anything," he said gently, his voice carrying just enough to reach her, not enough to perform, Just stay with me. For a second, Claire's eyes locked onto his hand, onto the rhythm, onto something familiar she could not yet explain, and then, slowly, her fingers twitched. The movement was so small most people would have missed it, but Daniel saw it, and he nodded once, not in celebration, but in acknowledgement, like someone who knew this was not a miracle. It was a beginning. He tapped again, this time pausing longer between each beat, giving her space, giving her time, and somewhere deep in the room, a glass was set down carefully. Someone leaned forward. Someone else stopped whispering because the air itself had changed. Ellie Brooks stood near the side entrance, her small hands gripping the edge of her father's worn jacket that hung over a chair, her eyes wide, but not surprised because she had seen this before. Not here, not like this, but in quieter places, in smaller moments, in the spaces where people did not expect anything to change. Come on, she murmured under her breath, not as pressure, but as belief, because to her, this was not impossible. It was simply who her father was. Claire's lips parted slightly, not to speak, not yet, but to breathe differently, to exist differently, and Daniel saw that too. He shifted his hand, tapping a softer pattern now, something less structured, more like a lullaby remembered than a rhythm taught. That is it, he said quietly. You are doing just fine. Victor stood up without realizing it, his chair scraping faintly against the marble floor, the sound sharp in the stillness, but no one turned. No one looked away because something sacred was happening, something that did not belong to wealth or status or control. Claire took a step forward, just one, and the distance between her and Daniel closed by inches, but in that space lived something far greater than movement. It was trust, and Daniel did not reach for her, did not break the moment by doing too much. He simply remained steady, present, grounded, like a man who had learned that the most powerful thing you can offer someone is not instruction, but safety. The silence in the room deepened, not empty, not awkward, but full, like the pause before a song begins, and for the first time that night, no one was waiting for Claire to fail. They were waiting to see if she would choose to stay. Claire did not speak, not yet, but something inside her shifted in a way no one in that room had ever witnessed before. As her breathing slowed, uneven at first, then steadier, as if she had finally found a rhythm that belonged to her, and not to the expectations pressed upon her. Daniel watched without urgency, his eyes soft, his presence unwavering, because he understood that this moment was not about making sound. It was about allowing it to exist without fear. He tapped once more, lighter now, almost fading, as if he were slowly handing the rhythm back to her. You can stop whenever you want, he said gently, offering her control instead of pressure, and that was the difference. That was the quiet line no one else had seen. Claire's fingers lifted slightly from her sides, hesitant, uncertain, then hovered in the air like they were remembering something long forgotten. The room leaned closer. Without moving, Victor took a single step forward, then stopped himself, his hands tightening at his sides because for the first time in years he was afraid to interrupt. Not failure, but possibility. Say something. A voice whispered from the back, not cruel, just impatient, and it broke against the stillness like a stone against glass. Daniel did not look back. He did not acknowledge it. He simply softened his voice even more. You do not have to speak for them, he murmured. You only have to be here. Claire's lips trembled again, but this time it was different, not from fear, but from effort, from something rising that had never been allowed to rise before. And then, barely audible, like a sound testing its own existence, a breath shaped itself into something more than silence. It was not a word, not yet, but it was not nothing either. Ellie's eyes filled with quiet tears, her hand pressing against her chest as if she could feel the same rhythm her father had offered, echoing now in someone else. Victor's breath caught, sharp and sudden, the kind of sound a man makes when he realizes he is standing at the edge of something he has waited for, but no longer knows how to hold. Claire, he said softly, his voice breaking just enough to reveal the years behind it. But Claire did not turn toward him, not because she did not love him, but because for the first time she was choosing something for herself. Daniel nodded once, a small, grounding gesture, then lowered his hand completely, removing the guide, removing the support, trusting her to remain. Claire stood there, alone now in the center of the room, the silence no longer heavy, no longer suffocating, but open, wide, like a door that had finally been unlocked. And for a long moment, nothing happened, and that nothing was everything. Marissa shifted uncomfortably, her practiced smile gone, her confidence unraveling in the face of something she could not manage or frame for an audience, because this was not a performance. This was not a story she could control. This was truth, raw and unpolished and completely indifferent to status. Then Claire's eyes moved, slowly, deliberately, not scanning the crowd, not searching for approval, but returning to the one place she had felt safe. She looked at Daniel, and in that gaze, something settled, something anchored, something chose to stay. Her lips parted. Again, more certain this time, and the room, every inch of it, held its breath, not in doubt, not in judgment, but in reverence, because they were no longer watching a girl who could not speak, they were witnessing a girl who might, and in that fragile, suspended moment, the power in the room no longer belonged to wealth, or expectation, or control. It belonged to a quiet man who had asked for 30 seconds, and a child who was finally beginning to believe she had more than silence. And then it happened, not loud, not clear, not perfect, but real, as Claire's lips shaped a sound that trembled into the air like the first drop of rain after a long, unbroken drought. Ah! It came out soft, fragile, almost unsure of itself, but it was there, unmistakable, undeniable, and for a heartbeat the room did not react, because no one quite believed what they had just heard. Daniel did not move, did not celebrate, did not interrupt the moment with anything that would make it about him. He simply held her gaze and nodded once, a quiet affirmation that said, "You are safe. You are heard. You are enough." Claire blinked, her chest rising a little faster now, not from fear, but from something new, something unfamiliar and overwhelming in the gentlest way. And then, with a little more strength, she tried. Again, the second sound was clearer, shaped with intention, reaching towards something just beyond her grasp. Ellie covered her mouth with both hands, her eyes shining, her small body trembling with a joy she did not dare release too loudly, because even she understood that this moment needed to be protected, not celebrated. Victor staggered forward one more step, his composure breaking completely now as years of quiet desperation cracked beneath a single fragile syllable. "Claire," he whispered again, his voice no longer controlled, no longer guarded. Just a father standing in front of a miracle he had stopped believing in. Marissa did not speak this time, her silence sharper than any comment she had made before, because there was no way to spin this, no way to package it, no way to take ownership of something that had come from a place she did not understand. Daniel slowly shifted his weight, not toward Claire, but slightly back, creating space, giving her the room to continue on her own, because this was no longer about guiding her. This was about trusting her. Claire's eyes flickered once more, and then they softened, settling into something steadier, something anchored, and then, as if the word had been waiting inside her all along, she let it go. "Dad." It came out broken, barely more than a whisper, but it carried across the room with a weight that silenced everything else completely. Victor froze, the word landing not just in his ears but in his chest, in the part of him that had been waiting, aching, hoping for years without ever admitting it out loud. Tears welled instantly, unrestrained, as he dropped to his knees right there on the polished floor, no longer the composed millionaire, no longer the man with answers, just a father hearing his daughter call him for the first time. The room did not erupt into applause, it did not fill with noise, it simply went still, deeply, reverently still, as if everyone present understood that anything louder would break something sacred. Daniel lowered his eyes for a moment, not out of humility alone, but out of respect for the space he had helped open, and then stepped back another inch, quietly removing himself from the center of the moment he had made possible, but did not need to own. Claire looked at him again, just for a second, her expression no longer lost, no longer closed, but awake, and in that look there was recognition, not of what he had done, but of how he had made her feel safe enough to do it herself. Ellie ran to his side, slipping her hand into his, her voice a whisper filled with wonder. "You did it, Dad." Daniel shook his head gently, his voice soft, steady, certain. "No," he said, watching Claire as she took a hesitant step toward her father. "She did." And in that quiet correction, something even greater settled over the room, not just the miracle of a voice found, but the deeper truth that dignity does not need to be announced. It simply reveals itself when the world finally learns to listen. The room remained still, the kind of silence that carried weight, not from anticipation alone, but from a sense that something extraordinary had just unfolded, and everyone present was witness to it. Daniel Brooks took a slow, deliberate breath, the kind that draws the world inward and then releases it with calm authority, and he knelt beside Claire, his hand hovering gently near hers, not touching, not guiding, simply present as a constant she could anchor herself to. Ellie pressed closer to him, her small hand lightly brushing against his sleeve, offering comfort and solidarity in a language only they shared. Victor Whitmore's face was a mixture of awe, disbelief, and a profound tenderness that had lain dormant for years, his eyes wet, glinting under the soft chandelier light that reflected off the polished marble floor around them. Marissa Kane shifted in her seat, the sharp edges of her tailored jacket crumpling slightly as she realized that no wealth, no polished skill, no rehearsed intervention could replicate what had just happened, and that the real transformation belonged entirely to the quiet man and the child who had found her voice. Daniel spoke again, his words deliberate, measured, carrying an ease and steadiness that seemed to bend the air toward calmness. "Take your time," he said softly, his eyes never leaving Claire's. "There is no rush here. No one expects anything from you but yourself." Claire's eyes widened slightly, recognition flickering across them as if the concept of permission, of agency, had just been handed to her by the simple authority of a man who did not demand, who did not judge, and who, in the quietest way, had created space for her to exist fully. She exhaled, barely audible at first, a whisper of air that carried the shape of a sound, and then another, more defined, almost imperceptible, yet unmistakably a syllable that drew a breath from everyone nearby, filling the space with the fragile promise of more to come. Ellie leaned into Daniel, her voice a soft murmur, almost drowned by the reverent hush of the room. "She is doing it, Dad." And Daniel nodded slowly, a ghost of a smile forming, not of triumph, but of shared understanding that the real victory lay not in sound alone, but in trust built across years of patience and quiet vigilance. The pianist at the side shifted his fingers, not to play, not to compete with the moment, but to offer a soft backdrop, a gentle thread of music that complemented Claire's tentative attempts without overtaking them. The notes like a delicate echo of the rhythm Daniel had established, a rhythm rooted in presence, patience, and dignity. Victor Whitmore reached out instinctively, his hands trembling as he attempted to bridge the gap between father and daughter, and Daniel gently raised a hand to stop him, signaling that this was not his moment, not his to lead or direct, only to support, only to witness and allow Claire to take ownership of her own emergence. Marissa Kane's lips parted slightly, and then she pressed them together, her gaze softening as she began to understand that influence, authority, and control were fleeting, and that sometimes the quietest, simplest acts had the power to unravel the most rigid expectations. Claire's lips moved again, more confidently now, her eyes still fixed on Daniel, as if drawing courage from his calm presence, and the room leaned in with collective breath held, not in anticipation of failure, but in reverent attention to the unfolding proof that patience, empathy, and steadfast dignity could create change. Daniel shifted slightly, his hand hovering near her arm, an unspoken promise that he would remain, unwavering and reliable, a sentinel of quiet strength. As Claire experimented with each sound, each syllable, discovering the shapes of her own voice in ways that money, influence, or structured therapy had never managed to elicit. Ellie's small hand pressed into Daniel's palm, grounding herself as her father grounded Claire, the three of them forming an unbroken line of trust, love, and resilience that radiated across the marble floor and into the hearts of those who had come to witness a demonstration of what it truly meant to see, to hear, and to honor someone in the simplest, most profound way possible. The chandelier light shimmered softly, reflecting off polished surfaces and highlighting the delicate tension that had dissolved into an unspoken harmony as Claire whispered again, each sound carrying more confidence, more intent, and Daniel nodded in quiet approval, his gaze steady, his posture relaxed but immovable, the kind of presence that allows courage to grow in another without interference. And for a long, suspended moment, the room collectively recognized that they were observing not a miracle imposed, but a miracle allowed, nurtured, and coaxed into being by a man whose quiet strength, patience, and dignity had made all the difference just as the room began to release its collective breath. A subtle tension returned, a reminder that miracles are rarely uninterrupted, and that recognition often arrives with a delicate shadow of doubt. Marissa Kane stepped forward, her polished heels clicking softly against the marble, her eyes fixed on Daniel with a mixture of concern and disbelief. "This is extraordinary," she said, her voice measured. "But is it appropriate for a garbage man to be this involved, to be so close to the child?" Daniel did not flinch, did not answer immediately, his calm presence anchoring Claire as she shifted slightly toward him. Drawing courage from the unspoken support, he offered Ellie's hand pressed firmly against his sleeve, as if to reinforce the line of trust that extended from father to daughter to child before them. Victor Whitmore's expression hardened for a brief moment, the weight of responsibility pressing down on him as he struggled to reconcile pride in Claire's first words with a protective instinct that was almost reflexive. "She has made progress," Victor said quietly, his voice carrying both awe and the caution of a father who has weathered long years of fear and hope. "But I do not want to push her beyond her limits." Daniel nodded, understanding entirely that the moment was delicate, that the child's autonomy was the center of this fragile emergence, and that interference, however well-intentioned, could undo everything he had patiently nurtured. "I am not here to push," he said gently, his voice steady, soft, full of the kind of quiet authority that does not dominate but supports. "I am here to be present, to offer her stability, and to witness what she is ready to share." Claire's lips moved again, forming a longer sound this time, more intentional, more confident, her eyes wide, her small body trembling with the effort of discovery, but not fear. The pianist at the edge of the room began to play the faintest accompaniment, soft, unobtrusive, as if even music understood its role to support rather than overpower. Daniel shifted his weight slightly, keeping his eyes on Claire, offering subtle encouragement without interrupting the rhythm that was beginning to emerge inside her. It was a moment of equilibrium, a balance between guidance and freedom, and the room, composed of wealthy and powerful observers, leaned in, sensing that control had shifted from them to a man whose quiet diligence had earned the child's trust, and to a child who had chosen, finally, to be heard. Marissa's hands folded in front of her, her posture stiffening as she realized that influence did not come from authority or wealth, but from understanding, patience, and empathy. And for a long moment, she simply watched. Silent. Victor Whitmore exhaled slowly, tears threatening again, as he observed Daniel maintaining a presence that was firm without being overbearing, and Claire experimenting with each sound, shaping each syllable with a confidence that was growing, just enough to fill the air with the fragile proof of her voice's emergence. Ellie whispered, "She is doing it," barely audible, and Daniel's hand shifted, brushing her small fingers reassuringly, reinforcing the shared connection without disturbing the focus on Claire. A hush settled over the room, a reverent quiet that wrapped around the chandelier light, the polished floors, the soft murmur of the crowd as all eyes followed Claire's tentative yet determined expressions and movements. Each breath she took, each syllable she shaped, carried more than sound. It carried trust, courage, and the delicate affirmation that patience and quiet strength can achieve what wealth, pressure, and formal instruction alone cannot. Daniel's gaze remained fixed, steady, unwavering, offering security without command, and Claire, sensing the unwavering support, drew a final, deep breath before allowing herself to speak more fully, each word a small victory, a testament to the power of quiet presence, empathy, and the dignity that Daniel had cultivated with care and humility throughout their shared journey. After the first words escaped Claire's lips, a new current ran through the room, subtle but undeniable, as if the air itself had shifted to accommodate the courage being born before their eyes. Daniel Brooks remained kneeling, his posture calm, his eyes unwavering, offering both a grounding presence and a silent invitation for Claire to continue exploring her voice without interference or expectation. Ellie Brooks stayed close to him, her small hand pressed lightly against his arm, a tether of quiet reassurance, her own breath shallow and careful as she witnessed the unfolding miracle. Victor Whitmore took a step closer, his heart swelling with emotion, yet he restrained himself, understanding that stepping forward too soon might disrupt the delicate rhythm that Daniel had established. and that Claire was learning to trust. Claire exhaled again, this time a little longer, the sound forming into more complete syllables that blended into a rhythm she had never known she could command. And the room, wealthy and composed though it was, felt the weight of their attention pulled into something far more authentic than ceremony or protocol. Daniel spoke softly, just enough for her to hear, not to direct, not to coach, but to affirm. "You are doing wonderfully, Claire," he said, his voice steady and warm, a constant in a space that had seemed filled with uncertainty and pressure only moments ago. Claire's eyes brightened, and she allowed herself a small, hesitant smile, the kind that lights from within and requires nothing from the outside world to validate it. Ellie whispered, "She is finding her own strength," barely audible, yet carrying a depth of pride and awe that could be felt across the room. Daniel nodded once, his gaze never leaving Claire, his hand subtly indicating space around her for freedom of movement, a simple, deliberate gesture of support rather than control. Marissa Kane shifted in her seat, her carefully constructed composure faltering as she realized that the situation had transcended any plan or expectation she could have imposed. She leaned back slightly, her breath caught in the soft echo of silence, acknowledging that the quiet dignity of Daniel's presence had created a new form of authority, one that came not from position or wealth but from patience, empathy, and the unwavering respect of someone who understood what it meant to be present. Claire continued, her syllables forming tentative phrases, her lips moving with more confidence now, guided not by instruction but by the trust she had come to place in Daniel's unspoken support and the subtle rhythm he had modeled through his gentle, steady gestures. The pianist allowed her hands to hover above the keys, pressing a single note here and there to gently complement Claire's emerging voice without dominating it. As if even music recognized the quiet power of authenticity, Victor Whitmore's chest rose and fell in unsteady breaths, his eyes misty, witnessing the transformation, the manifestation of patience and dedication, and the realization that his daughter had been waiting all this time for a space where she could emerge safely. Daniel's hand shifted ever so slightly, a grounding touch near Ellie, reinforcing the connection that spanned father, daughter, and child. A silent communication of stability and trust. Claire's small frame straightened, a surge of subtle confidence moving through her, as she began to experiment with longer phrases, allowing her voice to navigate through the space with more certainty. And the room held this collective pause, absorbing the quiet triumph that had unfolded not through spectacle, not through ceremony, but through the careful, intentional cultivation of safety, presence, and grace. Daniel watched, his gaze steady, his voice calm, offering only affirmation and support, letting Claire take the lead, and in doing so, allowing the room to witness the profound truth that real strength, patience, and dignity could inspire courage in ways that authority or control never could. And in the soft glow of chandelier light, amidst polished floors and attentive eyes, Claire's voice grew, a subtle crescendo, proof of the quiet power that can only be nurtured through unwavering attention, empathy, and the gentle, invisible hand of someone who believes in you without expectation or fanfare. After the first full phrases had been formed by Claire, a hush settled over the ballroom, not the kind of silence that waits for applause, but a quiet reverence, a collective holding of breath as the room absorbed the gravity of what had unfolded. Daniel Brooks remained kneeling, his eyes steady on Claire, not moving, not speaking more than necessary, because he understood that the power of this moment was in her agency, not his intervention. Ellie Brooks kept a careful hold on her father's sleeve, her small fingers pressing into the fabric as though anchoring herself to his calm. Yet she did not interrupt, she did not cheer. She simply witnessed Victor Whitmore, standing a few feet away, letting the emotion flood his chest, allowing the tears to spill, his face reflecting awe, relief, and an overwhelming gratitude that he had not allowed himself to fully feel until now. Marissa Kane, seated slightly behind Victor, adjusted in her chair, her carefully maintained posture revealing subtle cracks of surprise and admiration, as she realized that no wealth, no training, no pretense could have created what a patient, quiet man and a trusting child had achieved. Daniel's voice broke the silence only to offer gentle affirmation. "You are safe, Claire, and you are heard." and those words, calm and measured, carried through the room without demand or expectation, wrapping around Claire like a protective shield and giving her courage to continue. She lifted her head slightly, her gray eyes scanning the room just long enough to meet her father's, and Daniel nodded, a small, steady gesture that said, "I am here. I am with you." Without commanding or controlling, the pianist's fingers hovered above the keys, then pressed softly, producing delicate notes that complemented Claire's voice without overpowering it, allowing the space to be filled with a subtle musical current that reinforced safety, trust, and rhythm in a way only felt by those paying close attention. Ellie whispered, almost to herself, "She is doing it. She is really doing it." And Daniel's hand brushed gently against hers in response, grounding her while giving her permission to be part of the unfolding miracle. Claire's lips moved again, forming longer phrases, more fluid now, and the room could sense the growth, the evolution from tentative syllables to expressive words, each sound carrying more confidence, more clarity, more presence, proof that patience, quiet guidance, and unwavering support can nurture profound change. The chandelier light caught on the polished marble, reflecting softly across the walls and highlighting the subtle movements of everyone present, from the smallest gestures of Ellie's hands to the faint exhale of Victor as he allowed the room to witness his daughter's achievement. Without interference, Daniel shifted his weight slightly, giving Claire space, letting her lead the momentum while he remained a constant, silent anchor, demonstrating that true guidance often comes from restraint, attentiveness, and belief in the capabilities of the one being nurtured. Marissa Kane's eyes softened, the rigid control she had maintained over her perception of the event giving way to understanding that influence, power, and authority are fleeting, and sometimes the greatest impact comes from subtlety, presence, and unwavering patience. As Claire spoke more words, each one more complete than the last, Daniel allowed himself the faintest exhale, a sign of internal relief, knowing that his role was not to take credit, but to ensure that a child felt safe enough to emerge into her own voice. Ellie's hand remained lightly on his arm, a silent affirmation of shared connection, a witness to the unfolding grace, and Victor Whitmore, now standing taller, allowed himself a brief smile of recognition that the miracle had not been orchestrated by wealth, by influence, or by force, but by quiet strength, patience, and dignity, qualities that Daniel Brooks had exemplified throughout the journey, and which had allowed Claire to discover her voice on her own terms in a space that respected her autonomy and celebrated her courage, resulting in a quiet, profound stillness that filled every corner of the grand room with reverent awe, a testimony to the power of quiet guidance, empathy, and steadfast presence. As the final notes of Claire's emerging voice hung in the air, the room seemed to exhale as one, a collective release that was neither loud nor performative but deeply, profoundly quiet. Daniel Brooks stood slowly, not seeking attention, not needing recognition, simply observing the child he had quietly guided and the subtle transformation that had taken place before their eyes. Ellie Brooks squeezed his hand gently, her own eyes reflecting wonder and a quiet pride that spoke more than words could convey. Victor Whitmore stepped closer to his daughter, kneeling down to meet her gaze, his face soft with emotion, the years of worry and unanswered questions melting into a shared understanding of courage and patience. Claire smiled faintly, a small, authentic expression that radiated accomplishment and trust, and in that moment, the room recognized that the true hero was not defined by status, wealth, or expectation, but by unwavering presence, dignity, and the gentle power of belief in another human being. Daniel nodded once, a quiet acknowledgement of the journey they had taken together, his eyes meeting Victor's in mutual respect, unspoken gratitude passing between them as they understood the significance of what had just been achieved. Marissa Kane remained seated, her usual composure softened, her hands folded in her lap, silently witnessing a demonstration of strength that was not measured by control or command but by empathy, patience, and the courage to stand aside and let growth occur. Naturally, Claire took a tentative step toward Victor, then back toward Daniel, recognizing the balance of trust that had been offered to her, and as she moved, she discovered an inner confidence that had previously been hidden, a realization that her voice, however small and fragile, had weight, importance, and the power to be heard. The pianist played a few gentle chords in the background, underscoring the delicate, almost sacred atmosphere without imposing, allowing the sounds of the room, the breaths, the quiet reactions of each person present to form a harmony that celebrated authenticity and human connection. Daniel guided Ellie back to his side, their hands linked, their presence a stabilizing force not only for Claire, but for the entire space, reinforcing that dignity and quiet strength could inspire courage more effectively than any spectacle or display. Victor Whitmore lifted his daughter into a gentle embrace, feeling her heartbeat, feeling the life in her words, a connection that had been fostered through patience, care, and unwavering attention rather than instruction or demand. The room, still silent, seemed to vibrate softly with the impact of the moment, a shared recognition of the power of quiet actions, of respect, and of allowing someone to lead their own journey without interference. As Claire rested her small hand against Daniel's, she whispered another word, barely audible but clear, a testament to trust and progress, and Daniel offered the faintest smile, not prideful but reflective, knowing that his role had been to provide space, to hold steady, and to honor the child's courage. The chandeliers above cast a warm glow, illuminating the faces of all present, each observing and absorbing the significance of what had occurred, a quiet miracle built on patience, presence, and empathy, leaving the audience with the lingering thought of how often the simplest acts of kindness and belief in another can change a life forever. And as the room slowly returned to its usual rhythm, the question lingered in the hearts of those watching, inviting reflection on the power of dignity, empathy, and second chances, encouraging each to consider how they might create space for courage in the lives of others, and perhaps to witness more miracles in their own worlds, inspiring them to subscribe and continue following stories where quiet strength and compassion reshape lives in the most unexpected ways.